Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. You know the drill. We're ranking all the Pillars of Eternity classes. If you need a refresher on basic mechanics, there's a link in the description to my 2023 Pillars of Eternity Beginner's Guide. Let's jump into the third class of this series, Cipher. Also known as Mind Hunters, this class has the ability to manipulate the essence of allies or enemies to create magical effects. The core mechanic of this class are powers, which can be used when ciphers generate a certain amount of focus. Focus is gained by damaging enemies via your Soul Whip, which is a passive ability that is active anytime your focus is below maximum. It will increase your melee and range damage by 20%, freeing you up to play this class in any way you choose. Ciphers gain a +1 in stealth, lore, and mechanics. There are multiple Cipher powers that are great to open combat with, so specializing in stealth is not a bad idea. Lore and mechanics are great options for your main character as well. Ciphers gain very low endurance, low health, average accuracy, and average deflection. Obviously, those are not good stats for a tank, but that doesn't stop people from making this class a frontline fighter to generate focus faster. Starting at level 1, you can select 2 level 1 powers. Every Cipher power will have a line that tells you how much focus is required in order to use it. If you don't have enough focus, you must damage more enemies to generate the focus necessary for that power. Antipathetic Field creates a beam between yourself and an enemy, periodically damaging anyone who crosses into the beam's path. The beam does great damage, but it can absolutely melt your party members. If you are comfortable with micromanaging your entire team to stay away from the beam, then it can be very nice, but if not, then skip it. Eye Strike renders one enemy blind and dazed while blinding other nearby enemies. Blind reduces accuracy by 25, perception by 4, movement by 2, and the enemy's reflex and deflection defenses are reduced by 20. Daze reduces accuracy by 10, attack speed by 15%, and dexterity, intellect, and perception are reduced by 2. This is a very effective debuff and definitely something you want to have in your repertoire. Mind Wave causes raw damage on one target and knocks other enemies directly behind that target prone. Prone reduces dexterity by 2, reflex and deflection by 10, and the enemy cannot take any actions. It's alright, but the raw damage is mediocre and there are better options. Soul Shock must be applied on an allied target and will subsequently do fantastic shock damage to all nearby enemies. I think this is arguably the best option on the list. Letting Edda run out front to draw tons of aggro and then quickly throwing this on him is very effective. Pick it up. Tenuous Grasp causes one enemy to become frightened and confused. Frighten causes enemies to have their resolve and dexterity reduced by 2, while their accuracy is reduced by 10. Confusion causes your foes to periodically attack other enemies, walk aimlessly, do nothing, or attack normally. Both of these are useful debuffs, but again, at this early stage, the pure damage from Soul Shock is your most useful option. Whisper of Treason will charm one enemy, which causes them to use basic attacks against your enemies and reduces their speed, accuracy, and all defenses by 25. I am a fan of this power because it has a fast speed, meaning you can quickly turn one powerful enemy to your side and then get to work whittling away at the minions. Pick this up. At level 2, you have 4 Cipher-specific talents to choose from. Biting Whip will increase your melee and range damage bonus by another 20%, and I would suggest picking it up immediately for obvious reasons. Psychic Backlash will cause you to automatically attempt to stun enemies anytime they attack your will defense. This is nice to have, but only if you have a talent point to spare. Draining Whip gives you an additional 33% focus gain. This should be the second talent you pick up. At first, the powers you use have very low focus requirements, so I don't think it's worth picking up right off the bat, but it very quickly becomes crucial to your build. Finally, there's Greater Focus, which gives you a +10 to max focus. After you've picked up a couple of general talents to round out your build, this is worth getting as well. At level 3, you get access to level 2 powers. Note that the amount of focus to cast a power increases as you get to higher level options. Amplified Thrust must be used on an allied target and will cause a large amount of pierce damage on the nearest enemy, along with pushing them back 3 meters. While the damage is nice, I don't care for this ability because it pushes the target back 3 meters, which disrupts the ability of your frontline fighters to damage them. If your party is mostly ranged, that's not an issue, otherwise I would skip this. Mental Binding is the best option on this list, paralyzing one enemy while rendering all other nearby enemies stuck. Paralyze reduces an enemy's dexterity to 0, while reducing their reflex and deflection defenses by 40. They also cannot take any actions. This is a massive debuff that absolutely shuts down dangerous enemies, including most bosses. Stuck enemies are unable to leave their location, have their dexterity reduced by 2, accuracy reduced by 5, and reflection and deflection defenses are reduced by 20. Many enemies must be in melee range to deal damage, so this secondary effect can also serve to mitigate what your foes can do. Great power all around, definitely pick this up. Mind Blaze does slashing damage against one enemy and then also attacks up to 5 other nearby enemies. This ability does less damage than Soul Shock, and each attack after the initial strike must be rolled separately. If an attack fails, then this ability will not jump to additional enemies. Therefore, it can potentially hit less enemies than Soul Shock, and overall I would recommend you skip it. Phantom Foes significantly reduces the amount of nearby allies you need to flank your enemies, and it also makes them frightened. This can be fantastic if you have multiple characters who can deal sneak attack damage, or multiple ranged characters who usually have a difficult time triggering flanking bonuses. Psycho Vampiric Shield reduces a target's resolve by 10 to increase your own deflection by 25. Reducing resolve will also reduce will and concentration for that enemy, so depending on the makeup of your party, this ability can set up enemies for additional debuffs and major damage. Recall Agony causes 30% of all damage an enemy has experienced within a specific time frame to be reapplied. This is very useful against bosses with high HP, so it's worth picking up. At level 4, if you have chosen Psychic Backlash previously, you will get access to Brutal Backlash. This adds 20 raw damage to the stun effect. If you have an extra talent point, feel free to pick this up, otherwise you can skip it. At level 5, you unlock level 3 powers. Ecto Psychic Echo creates a beam that connects with one of your allies and deals massive crushing damage to all of your enemies. This beam deals no friendly fire damage, so it's an upgraded version of Antipathetic Field. This is a monster ability, and quite possibly Cipher's best power. It does require micromanagement, as you'll need to maneuver the beam into the best angle, and many enemies are immune to crushing damage, so in some battles this ability is useless. Despite this drawback, it's absolutely worth picking it up. Fractured Volition causes one enemy to be hobbled and weakened. Hobbled creatures have their dexterity reduced by 2, their movement reduced by 1.5, and their resolve defenses reduced by 20. Weakened enemies have their might and constitution reduced by 2, movement reduced by 1, and fortitude and will defenses are reduced by 20. Most times you'll want to debuff large crowds, and if you are dealing with one enemy, you'll most likely want to paralyze them instead. Skip this. Pain Link causes 25% of the damage one allied target experiences to be reapplied onto all nearby enemies. Obviously, this is irrelevant in small amounts, but if you have a character with massive health and you know they are going to experience a large amount of damage, this can be useful. Plus, it's a rare buff that you can apply outside of combat, making it even more useful. The problem is, more than likely, the character on your team who has a high enough health pool to make this worthwhile is probably also set up to heavily mitigate any incoming damage. Therefore, most likely, this ability is useless to you. Puppet Master causes an enemy to become dominated, which makes them use all of their abilities against your foes. This is an upgrade over the level 1 power Whisper of Treason, which inflicts Charmed, a status effect that makes enemies use their basic attacks against other foes. Despite this, I consider Whisper of Treason the superior option, since it requires significantly less focus, has a longer range, and in practice, Dominated isn't a significantly better debuff than Charmed. Skip this. Secret Horrors causes all enemies in a small radius to become frightened and sickened. Sickened enemies have all attributes reduced by 1, and their fortitude and will defenses are reduced by 10. It's obviously useful to apply these debuffs on multiple enemies, especially if you are focusing on sneak attacks. Soul Ignition deals a large amount of burn damage over a period of time. Unfortunately, the damage comes out too slowly, and most times it makes more sense to use your beam or paralyze a target rather than using this. At level 7, you unlock level 4 powers. Body Attunement drains a portion of a target's damage reduction and gives it to you temporarily. The amount of DR you drain is mediocre considering how much focus you need to use this, so I would skip it. Mind Lance inflicts major piercing damage to all characters in a line and has an improved chance to interrupt targets. The beam does more damage over time, can be moved to cover different areas, and doesn't impact party members, so this is an inferior option. Skip it. Pain Block gives one ally additional damage reduction and endurance regeneration for a limited amount of time. Since the healing occurs over time, you can cast it right before you believe your tank is going to be destroyed, and it will already be in place. I don't care to use my Cipher in this way, so I skip it, but it's absolutely useful, so feel free to select it. Silent Scream deals raw damage and stuns one enemy while also dealing raw damage to all nearby enemies. Stunned enemies cannot take any action, their dexterity, perception, and intellect are reduced by 4, and their reflex and deflection defenses are reduced by 30. Keep in mind raw damage bypasses damage reduction, so this is great to use against enemies whose defenses you cannot crack. The issue is this power has a shorter range than most of the ones you regularly use, so if your Cipher is squishy, deploying this on a regular basis may not be viable. Wild Leech takes 10 points from a random attribute of an enemy and gives it to you. Since you cannot control which attribute is selected, I consider this to be trash and recommend you skip it. Going Between increases an ally's movement speed by 3 and has a 25% chance to downgrade any enemy attack. So crits could become hits, hits could become grazes, and grazes could become misses. Obviously, a tank would benefit from this, but I still don't think it's worth the focus cost. Skip it. At level 9, you unlock level 5 powers. Ringleader dominates one target and charms nearby enemies. This is a big deal, as you can basically turn half an enemy group against itself. Definitely pick this up. Borrowed Instinct reduces an enemy's intellect and perception by 8 while increasing your accuracy and defenses by 20. I prefer debuffs that set enemies up for damage, so personally I skip this, but it's not a bad pickup. Detonate does solid damage and can outright explode enemies with low endurance, doing crush damage to all nearby enemies in the process. If this occurs, I believe it also destroys the gear that the enemy might have dropped. Regardless, it's nice to take out low health enemies, so probably worth picking up, but most times the beam is your better option. Tactical Meld gives you a bonus of plus 20 to accuracy when attacking the same target as the ally you give this power. This is another rare buff that can be placed before combat, and that alone means you should pick it up. Quick note before we review the last 3 levels. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate you hitting the like button. This information lets me know which videos the community is enjoying. If you want to support this kind of content, please consider becoming a member of the channel, where you will get access to full playthrough episodes. At level 11, you unlock level 6 powers. Amplified Wave must be placed on an allied target and then creates a wave that does crush damage and knocks enemies prone. You should be casting this as often as possible, since the radius is massive and it really helps you control the battlefield. Disintegration does a massive amount of raw damage over a period of time. If this effect reduces the target to 0 endurance, they fade into non-existence, and once again, I believe you lose the enemy's gear. The bigger problem with this power is that the damage is impacted by might, but the amount of seconds it runs is impacted by intelligence. So high intelligence increases the amount of seconds this runs, but the actual damage number is unaffected, and therefore it's just stretching the same amount of damage over a longer period of time. Consequently, characters with high intelligence, which is probably most Ciphers, will do significantly less damage per second with this ability. Therefore, I would skip it, unless you are doing a low intelligence run. Mind Plague dazes and confuses up to 6 targets. This isn't a bad option, but I prefer Puppet Master to turn multiple targets against each other since it costs less. At level 13, you unlock level 7 powers. Stasis Shell makes one enemy unable to act, but also immune to damage for a period of time. There is no situation that using this is a superior option to paralyzing an enemy, so I would skip it. Time Parasite steals 50% of the attack speed from up to 6 targets and gives it to you. This can be a fantastic way to increase the amount of damage your Cipher is pumping out, depending on the type of weapon they are using. So even though the cost is steep, it can still be worth using because you should regain the focus very quickly, and obviously it's a great debuff against enemies. Finally, at level 15, you unlock level 8 powers. Reaping Knives summons twin blades of pure energy that do massive damage and generate focus very quickly. This can be great to give one of your melee allies, so pick it up. Defensive Mind Web grants a friendly aura that makes all allies use the best defense of anyone in the web. To get the most out of this ability, you should optimize each party member in one of the defenses. If you do this properly, once the Cipher activates this ability, your party is basically invulnerable. Overall, I rank Cipher S. In my opinion, from a role-playing standpoint, Cipher feels like the canon choice for your main character. The concept of playing as someone who can peer into souls and manipulate them fits Cipher like a glove. In addition, the extra dialogue options you get playing as this class feel absolutely natural to a watcher. Conversations with Grieving Mother, most especially, are more rewarding when you play as this class. Speaking of Grieving Mother, she is your Cipher companion, and out of all your companion options, she has the least interactions with your party. Consequently, many players see her as a dead spot and prefer to bench her, which is easier if you are already playing as a Cipher. On top of all this, the mechanics for the class are outstanding, whether you want to focus on damaging enemies or debuffing them. The variety of powers you have access to means you can switch between both roles at will. The focused resource system ensures that no matter how long a dungeon is, you are always able to use your most devastating abilities. There's a minimum amount of micromanagement necessary to get the most out of Cipher, and in general, it's a ton of fun to play. All of this means that having two Ciphers in your party is actually not a crowd. So circling back to Grieving Mother, I kept her in the party while still running a Cipher myself and had an absolute blast. That completes my ranking of the Cipher class. I hope all of you enjoyed this video. Take care.